A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Renee Miller. She is the president and creative director at Miller Group Marketing. Renee, how are you doing today?
Good, Logan. Thanks so much for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to talking to you today.
Absolutely. We've got 3 examples that we're going to talk about where brands really avoided boring B2B advertising and unpack some lessons that we can all learn from that. But before we do that, Renee, I would love for you to give listeners a little bit of context for yourself and Miller Group Marketing. Give us a little bit of your background and what you and your team are up to these days.
I would be happy to. So we specialize in several different sectors: hospitality, financial services, not for profit. We do about 50% of our work is B2B and 50% is consumer. And I've spent a lot of time in my career judging a lot of different awards shows, communication arts, Addies. I mentor the One Club Creative Boot Camp for young people. So I've seen a lot of different work, and I'm excited to share a few examples of some companies that are doing terrific in the B2B sector.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's dive right into some of those specific examples, Renee. As you and I were chatting a little bit offline, we were talking about the podcast ad campaign that MailChimp did on the popular series Serial. Give people a little bit of context there, and then we can talk a little bit about what you felt like was really creative and effective with that campaign.
Terrific. So in 2014, MailChimp partnered with the producers of a true crime podcast, as you mentioned, called Serial, and it's subsequently become one of the most successful podcasts ever. It started off as a man on the street interview with one of the producers of the show, recruiting passersby on a busy street corner to introduce the service. A lot of people had never heard of MailChimp, and people were mispronouncing the name. Somebody even said MailChimp. And that spawned an entire campaign for MailChimp, because part of the problem was not only did people not know what it was, but there was a whole identity crisis. So they took what was real and what was organic and what was authentic and then just used it for advertising. And there were TV spots, there was radio, there was all the traditional, there was digital, and it all focused on the funny name of the company: MailChimp, MailKimp, MailShrimp. They even had a promotion where they asked people to call in and explain what they thought the name was and what it meant and what they heard. And the campaign ended up winning a Grand Prix award at Cannes Lions in 2017 because it was so clever, and it was so some of the other names: MailCrimp, MailShrimp, Tail
Right.
Limp, Fail Chips, and Jail Blimp. So their budget was about $3 million, but they got far in excess in terms of results because it was so clever and so compelling. And people wanted to know, what kind of a brand is this that has this kind of a sense of humor? They didn't take themselves too seriously. Of course, it's a wonderful, MailChimp is a wonderful company, and we've used them. but it was very human and it was very personal. And I think that's what made it so interesting and
Mhm.
authentic and real.
Yeah, I love that. I love the way that, they were able to communicate that they don't take themselves too seriously, which made their brand more endearing to their buyers. And, it might seem counterintuitive to kind of embrace, the identity crisis. Most people would say, oh, we've got to get, we've really got to define our brand better or whatever the case might be. But seeing that they had that there, they actually just went all in on it, right? It's almost like everyone says, you don't touch your logo, right? Who's a good example of that? Google. We've seen their
Hmm.
logo in so many different ways that now that's uniquely Google of, the one company that does mess with their logo other than just, a big rebrand. So I think those were a couple of things that came to mind as you were explaining that. And I think that's a great example of non-boring B2B advertising. The next company that we talked about is one that I'm a big fan of. Wanted you to talk a little bit about this campaign from Slack, Renee.
Great. So for those people who don't know, it's a communications platform, and it streamlines the way people work through enhanced collaboration. A lot of people in the advertising industry know it. A lot of people in marketing know it. Media companies know it. But it's a communication tool that the platform can go across to a lot of B2B companies. And so they've done a very interesting job. They originally started with a regional campaign called Euphoria, and they used out of home, they used auto wraps, web banners, print ads to demonstrate a 32% increase in productivity among Slack users. So it communicated the benefits, and it was a product demo without being a demo. So it wasn't your typical B2B kind of yawn, boring demo. It was very clever, creative. And now they're running TV spots, 30-second TV spots featuring workers in colorful clothes and in large views of their office with showing Slack. And so one of the characters is sharing her company's vacation policy. She's greeted by virtual emojis, beach balls, and it's playful, it's clever, it's colorful, it's interesting. It makes people say, "Oh, and I want to know more about this." So,
Mhm.
there's so many ways that we can do a product demo, and they chose to do it in a real fashion with real people. And
Mhm.
I think that was a different way of communicating B2B.
That's really interesting. One of the things I think they're playing on there is this crossover between the digital and the physical worlds, right? Like someone physically in an office, but then seeing an emoji, kind of getting people to take a second. Whoa, okay, I recognize that, but it's novel. I don't normally see it in that setting. There's a company, their product is the Meeting Owl. Renee, have you
Mm.
seen these ads for, I believe the company is called Owl Labs?
No, I haven't. I haven't.
They're doing something similar right now. I've seen several of their YouTube ads where they have a camera that sits in the middle of a conference table, and it's got a 360 camera, and just makes it easier for remote employees to engage with people who are physically in an office, as that's more and more common. But one of the ways they bridge the physical and the digital, kind of like what you're talking about in the Slack campaign, is having somebody hold up a cardboard outline around their head to where it looks like they're on a conference call, but they're sitting in the office, but obviously they must have been on mute because they're yelling, but no one can hear them.
Oh,
And
okay.
so it's that same sort of thing, bridging the physical and the digital and kind of poking fun or finding a different way to share the common experiences that we all have. And I think those are a couple of themes in both that campaign and the one you're talking about with Slack that makes people share it, right? It's an advertisement, but it makes you share it. I'm talking about it here because it made me laugh, not because I have any, affinity or experience with the product or affiliation with them. So I love that. And it brings to mind other things that are non-boring B2B. So
Logan, so you mentioned share. It made you want to share, and I think social media is so critical today. And we don't, we have a lot of clients in the B2B world that want to know how to use it more efficiently and more effectively. And sharing information is really powerful. We sometimes just think of social in terms of B2B, in terms of LinkedIn, but there's so many ways to share information. And when you do find something clever and you do want to share it with other people, that's a huge plus for the brand. So we want to think in terms when we're doing something, an initiative with B2B, how can other people share it? And we want to make it as human and as clever and as emotional as possible, whether it's funny, whether it's serious, whether it brings a tear to your eye, it's joyous. It's something, the work that works the best is emotional, and it gets people sharing with other people, and it gets people thinking about the brand. And those are the things that work really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you kind of reverse engineer it, if I saw this creative, would it make me want to share it, or would I yawn, right? And sometimes we don't put ourselves in the shoes of our buyers. We so often don't do that, and it comes through, and that's when we get boring B2B marketing and advertising and everything else. So that's really well put, Renee.
One thing I would love to mention to the audience, because one of the tactics that we use when we're coming up with a new campaign for clients, I always look at work that's won awards, whether it's One Show, Cannes Film Festival, Addies, you name it. Because the work that I'm looking at doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the client, but I want to see what's possible. I want to see what the best work out there, what the best companies have done in the B2B sector. And so we get inspired by two things. One, digging as deep as we possibly can to find a great idea, and then seeing what other people have done, whether it's in that category or another category, because I think that's what's so inspiring. Ideas, and one thing that's really amazing to me is that ideas can come from anywhere. So we're very open to everyone sharing thoughts, everybody bringing something to the table, because you never know who in the room is going to say something that's going to generate a really great idea.
Absolutely. So, Renee, let's talk about another great example you brought up with me as we were chatting before this. And this is GE's campaign to get 20,000 women in their workforce by 2020.
Mm-hmm. And so this was called Balance the Equation, and it was empowering women scientists, young women who wanted to be scientists, to think about themselves on a different plane. And the contention was, what if female scientists were treated like rock stars? What would that be like? And so GE went out on a limb, and one of the installations they did was amazing. They showed some of the top female scientists in the world. They did a video at the train station, Grand Central. So it was a 10-minute presentation to everybody in Grand Central Station, showing female scientists, but conveying a message that what if these women were treated like rock stars? What would that be like? And it was such a moving and such an interesting proposition, because you don't think about that. So what it does is it empowers young women to think in terms of, wow, female scientists, what if they were treated like rock stars? What is that like? Making them feel empowered, and making women in business in general empowered. It was a really very, very effective way of tying GE in with women scientists. And I thought they just did a beautiful job with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's taking a concept that you want to talk about, but thinking about it in a little bit different way that isn't so far removed, as you mentioned, might be a little risky. Is that something that you see as a common thread as well, in addition to the creativity that, with each of these examples we've been talking about, Renee, there is a little bit of risk associated with them?
It's risk, but it's also looking at the situation. How do we convey messaging in a completely different way? And both the message, thinking of female scientists, what it would be like if they were treated like rock stars, and then also the means of communicating, going to Grand Central Station, huge, huge risk. I mean, GE could have easily just put out a white paper and they've done all these kinds of things as well. Put out a white paper or had an ad on LinkedIn. We're looking for female scientists, but they wanted to go deeper. They wanted to connect women with GE and show this is a bigger initiative. We're not just talking, we mean business. And by going out and talking to consumers as well as B2B audience, because half of the people, not half, but a lot of the people walking through Grand Central Station are business people. And all of us, whether we're B2B or B2C, we're still consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And we still react to emotional messaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I've mentioned it on other episodes where it's come up before, but a book I'm reading right now in the sales world called The Transparency Sale from Todd Capone. One of the things he's reiterated a lot is that we make decisions based on emotion and then we back them up by logic. And so if we're trying to market to the logic of people on the other end, then we're doing ourselves a disservice when it's emotion that is going to be the initial guiding piece, as you mentioned there. And whether you're a B2B buyer or a consumer looking at a B2C product, that emotional response is the same in different contexts. So I love what you're saying there. I love the examples you've shared today, Renee. We've talked about, MailChimp's ad on the Serial podcast, Slack's omni-channel everywhere campaign, and GE's Balance the Equation campaign, with a little shout out to the folks over at Owl Labs with some funny YouTube videos. We'll try to link to as many of those as we can in the show notes to give people some opportunity to engage with some of that creative and get the inspiration flowing from some great examples that you were able to share here today, Renee. If anybody listening to this, Renee, would like to stay connected with you, continue the conversation offline after this episode, what's the best way for them to reach out to you or your team at Miller Group Marketing?
Thanks, Logan. Absolutely. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Renee Miller on LinkedIn, or Miller Group Marketing on LinkedIn, or feel free to email me. It's Renee, RENEE, at millergroupmarketing.com. I'd love to hear from your listeners.
I love it. Renee, thank you again so much for joining me. This has been a great conversation.
Logan, thank you again, and I really appreciate it. I look forward to hearing your podcast.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.